The Gold Bug by Edgar Allan Poe up for discussion today.
Gold Bug!
This was a good story. I mean, the adventure, the mystery, the humor, puzzles, like nothing to do with how Flanagan interpreted it, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's definitely an offshoot or some liberties were taken. I enjoyed the story. All you said was true. I really liked that this didn't feel like your typical Halloween story, although you could definitely give the ambiance, some fog and, as they're in the swamp, looking for the treasure and stuff. It could definitely have that vibe, but it was a lot of fun. That was one thing that was unique, I think, to a kind of a Poe story.
And what I learned is that this was apparently, while he was alive, his most popular story. Even selling it to it was like a magazine or something like that, and he bought it back to enter in some competition, which he won, and also like $100, which was inflation adjusted, quite a lot of money. So I guess one of the first things I kind of wanted to talk about is, why is this so popular? Is it as simple as it was one of the stories always had puzzles? Like, I don't want to tell the world here that, Poe was the first to invent putting puzzles into it. But his usage of cryptology was definitely a forerunner in the way that it was just so intriguing. Do you think that was the main draw for the story?
I think it is a main draw, arguably the main draw. I don't know. I think if we look back in the 1840s, 1830s, entertainment is limited, right? You have to remember that no electricity yet, no movies, no radio. The main form of entertainment for many people is reading and going to plays. And so taking this information in and then almost like the author speaking to you, challenging you, giving you something to do within the story and being a participant is unique. Like many stories you just read and then, maybe you have a book club and you can talk about it with your family and your wife and your kids and whoever. But here in this case, you're kind of getting to be a participant. You're getting to be a detective in the story as well. And then I think the other argument is it's an adventure. It's a lot of people's dream, to find buried treasure. And that is something that I think a lot of us can relate to, of going on this whimsical adventure and finding riches and changing your life.
Well, and I think even if you combine those two, if we can view this sort of as a hero's journey, right? The decision to go with this guy that you think is mad, crazy, right? You have to leave to go out to this crazy area with like this tree and climb up on the seventh branch, which again, when it comes to the puzzles, there's a couple of parts that were kind of interesting where I'm like, well, if this map is that old, how would he, and only one of the branches is dead, for surely there would be more branches by the time like we were climbing up that, like there's a couple parts where I'm like,
you're thinking too much into it.
Yeah, well, and I'm not the only one. That part, I think I might be the only one on that one, overthinking how much trees grow a year. But there was another one. I remember when I was like looking at the most common letters and like H was really high up there. And I'm like, yeah, no, that I've played Wheel of Fortune. I know how this works. H is not higher than T and S.
Or an R or vowels.
Yeah, but I'm not trying to come down on Poe, but and I don't know if this is true, but I saw another YouTube video out there, and the guy had something to do with like the translation from Latin. I'm not sure I understood how all that worked, but he said that for some reason those letters were a higher number for whatever Poe was working on. Again, I don't know the details, but it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess that could make some argument. But point being, if we view breaking the code like this, whether it's coming from Latin or English, I don't really care. But if you're a member going on an adventure trying to break this code, isn't it kind of interesting that usually pirate map stories, the answer is given to you, you just have to follow it. Here it requires intellect on some level. It's a challenge to you, the reader. Can you figure this out? And arguably, if we're talking about intellect too, that kind of brings me to the next point too, about like usually with detective stories, the main detective's incredibly smart, right? Like in here, Legrand is so smart that even our main narrator underestimates him and thinks he's mad in the process, right? Like, what is it, I guess, about Poe where he lets the reader be like one step behind and he like pulls you along. He tells you how the cryptology works. He brings you on that adventure almost to like satisfy and challenge your intellect and bravery at the same time, if that makes sense.
It totally does. I think there's a unique flavor to the story, and I try to equate it to you're not allowed to know the twist until it's almost irrelevant. It becomes something that is like, oh, I don't really care about that because I've enjoyed the journey and the ending doesn't matter anymore. And that makes it very, very unique because I think many readers, and maybe I'm just speaking for myself, the ending is so clutch. You don't nail the ending, it doesn't matter. And in this story, it doesn't matter. It's the nuances along that you go with Lagrange and everybody else that really kind of matters to you as you realize what this means for the characters and their growth, as you said, is this kind of hero's journey.
Yeah. Something that's kind of interesting too is why a scarab? Like, have you ever heard about like what that might symbolize?
Oh crap, you're going with the Egyptian?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Rebirth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And good fortune, resurrection, that sort of thing. Like if you think back to Aladdin, right? The scarabs unlocks the cave of wonders, and then you get any wish you want granted, right? With the genie and all the riches there. It's kind of interesting that the scarab is used as to me, it was a rebirth for him because he had a lost family fortune, right? Which I think this is the part that was, I think, more in the Netflix is the chase to restore your family's glory. And we saw that too. I think even with like the Cask of Amontillado too, right? Like the family name and the history behind you is important because that history is a part of you. And the scarab is like this calling, right? That if you take up the journey, that this rebirth, this restoration to your family and family fortune is what will happen. And I think Poe's masterful storytelling and the pacing, like you said, we jump around back and forth, but like we make continual progress along the story, which I think is pretty cool.
One thing that did make me kind of mad though is it feels like there's no, I don't know how to explain it. You know, like when you're watching a movie or a show and you know that it's just going to turn out okay. There's no loss. There's no low point, right? That they're starting out at the bottom. There's nowhere left to go but up. And I think that was something that I guess could be relatable to a lot of people, that they're at the bottom and going on this adventure is one thing, but also having a fortune and restoring past glories is another thing. And it just felt a little cheap to me that we started at the bottom. We didn't see the character go through a loss and then redemption on the end.
We started at the bottom. Now we're here. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Bottom of the tree.
So it's kind of interesting. Like, I think people like reading about money seekers more so than money finders, if that makes sense. Like sometimes we're okay, even if the main character doesn't achieve the glory, like just the fact that they tried, and usually they learn something about themselves. But if we think about even just the time period in which this was released, you mentioned 40s and 30s, this came out in 1843, right? What starts-ish, officially classified from a history book perspective, about 5 years from now in America.
The antebellum period?
Let's put a pin in that. Okay, I do want to come back to that. I was actually gonna go different. I'm going back to the gold scarab, like
gold rush.
Gold rush, right? That 48 is when I think that's typically started. But we all know
48, 49, yeah.
Well, there's things leading up to it, and the gold rush, it's all about people trying to find that easy money, that easy win, right? I think readers themselves too are looking for their characters who want to go on that adventure, because I think they themselves don't want to necessarily take that risk. They'd rather read about other people's risks and fortune on some level too, if that makes sense.
Oh, that totally makes sense. I mean, that's one of the purposes of reading, right? Is I get to go on this adventure from the safety of my home, from the safety of my, my reading nook, and I get to live vicariously through somebody else. And these figures get to do that. It does seem that Poe is playing with us a little bit of back and forth of, do you root for this character or not, though? I mean, maybe we jump into this now. There's a lot of racism here as well. You don't know, are these good people? Do you feel like they deserve this? Do you want them to get this reward?
Yeah, I've put a lot of thought into that because I actually have a really hard time articulating it in this story, because I think there's more gray in this world than there is black and white. I really do. It's hard for everyone to be on the same page sometimes. Racism these days, you'd think it would be more black and white, but it's not. And what I think is interesting is at the time he's writing this, slavery is still illegal, right?
Oh, yeah.
And Poe, for some reason, made a choice to make Jupiter, right, a freed man. Like I forget the word that he used, but he is no longer an official slave. He's a freed black man, right? And it's like, I kind of wonder, why did he add that into this story, right? Like, if we look at the sleuth stories, going back to the Watson conversation earlier, you need to have that character that you relate with as a reader, I think. And then the person who's solving it is just so far ahead of you, you never saw it coming. And I think Poe does that, but he didn't need Jupiter for that here, right? Like, and on some level, like, they're so violent towards him. Jupiter, if you didn't know which one was the left, and they threaten him with violence, even though he's like a freed man, right? There's still that power struggle between them. It makes me question, like, what is Poe looking for the reader to connect with here? Like, what is this violence that we see? What is this opportunity of Jupiter taking the choice to go on this almost on some level? Like, it was never really clear for me what was happening with Jupiter.
Agreed. I took it, I guess, more of maybe an economic way. I mean, just the way that he's written, it doesn't feel like Jupiter is free. Still referring as the master, right? And even the way that it's written, the massa, with that very deliberate language of racism, or somebody that is seen as inferior. And it almost feels like it's more of an economic ploy of catering to somebody of money, or again, who had money and that is still sees himself as better, even though he doesn't have money anymore. It's very perplexing. And I think that it probably comes down to one that we've talked about many times, is we're looking through this with our rose-colored glasses from 2024, and it was just more of a style of writing then, and we may be reading too much into it. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe Poe just wanted to capture it for some reason. Maybe there's a Poe reader out there that's read the biography. Let us know. I don't really have an interest in breaking down like how accurate the speech was. Like, that just doesn't seem interesting to me. The general ploy I would like to figure out is, why is Jupiter there, right? Like, why make him? Maybe it was the word menument. Like, it was he. I believe that means to have been freed, right? And of course, there's the commentary of, did you like because there were slaves that when they were freed they didn't leave, right? Like that was all they knew. Maybe they were scared to go out. Like, was Poe exploring that somehow? I don't know. But I will say that, like, you had characters all over the board of not being in the know of what Lagrange, whatever his name is doing in terms of this great search, right? Because he doesn't reveal it. And I guess that's, okay, so let's flip that around. Everyone around you thinks you're mad. You're the captain, right? People need to believe in you. We've talked about this with, oh, captain, my captain. The captain's a symbol. The captain's the one that keeps everyone marching to the same drum. He's the one that's able to call the plays, playing quarterback to make sure everybody's where they need to be. You're Lagrange in this situation, and people are starting to think you're mad. They're not believing you. They could walk off at any time. Why continue to hold this shroud? Why hold the card so close to your chest as to what you're actually doing here so that people will believe in you? Like, what's besides tricking the reader, is the easy answer. What other
Yeah.
reasons would Lagrange have been doing in this situation to hold back that secret?
Because he doesn't know? I mean, I don't know. Or just it's a power play that I have control over you. And that is something that I think is very relevant to the time period. Any time period is having control, having to be able to lord it over somebody. I think that is easily relatable as we see the control throughout the story. And then when the money is found, how they kind of, almost treat each other, as equals for a moment there. But we still see that Jupiter's having to do most of the work as he is, delegated to getting all the treasure and everything out.
Mm-hmm. It's a story of obsession and complete control, perhaps, to get to that obsession, how we will use various means necessary, perhaps, to reach that goal.
Yeah. I mean, I would like to have $1.5 million of treasure from 1840, which would be like 40 million today.
Yeah.
By the way, that's important, right? Because it's a lot of money, and that can corrupt people very easily. We've talked about before, like when people die, money corrupts and breaks families, and that is enticing to people, especially somebody that has lost it and wants it again.
Yeah, I don't know. We used to run a Patreon. We don't run that anymore. It didn't seem to corrupt us.
I feel like that was a jab at me, but that's funny.
All right, guys. Thanks for listening to our talk. What did you take from this story? Control, obsession, madness, adventure? Let us know in the comments down below. There's a Edgar Allan Poe playlist down below. Feel free to check them out. My name's been Una. Thank you for spending time with us today.
Happy Halloween.